Russia. Winter, 1959. The Ural Mountains, ancient, silent, cold. A ridge near Kholat Syakh, known by the Mansi people as Dead Mountain. February winds howl like ghosts across the tundra. On this day, a search team makes its way up the icy slope. They've been looking for 9 hikers, 9 students, gone without a word. Then they see it. A tent, half buried in snow, torn, slashed from the inside out. Boots are still lined up neatly at the tent's edge, backpacks stacked, clothing untouched. But no one's inside. Just silence. Then come the footprints. Dozens of them, some barefoot, leading down the slope away from the tent into the trees. No signs of a struggle, no avalanche, no blood. And yet, it feels wrong. For hours, the searchers follow the trail until it vanishes into deep snow. And then, they find them. 2 bodies, near a dead fire, under a tree, barefoot, in underwear, their hands burned, their skin blue. A few hundred meters further, they find 3 more, sprawled in the snow, frozen in place, as if they'd been trying to crawl back. But the last 4, they aren't found for 2 more months. When the snow melts, a ravine reveals their bodies, and the horror truly begins. One woman, her tongue is missing, her eyes gone, chest cavity collapsed. Another man's skull fractured. The kind of trauma you'd expect from a car crash, not a fall. Their clothes, some soaked in radiation. No one can explain it. No animals, no attackers, no signs of violence. Only fear. But fear of what? The case is closed by Soviet investigators within months. They say a compelling natural force caused their deaths. That's it. No names, no causes, just that. But decades later, people are still asking what drove 9 experienced hikers in sub-zero temperatures to cut open their own tent from the inside and flee barefoot into the snow? Why was the group separated? Why such bizarre injuries? Why the radiation? And perhaps most disturbing of all, what were they trying to escape? Because something was out there, and it never left a footprint. This is the Dyatlov Pass incident, and this is where the mystery begins. They weren't reckless. They weren't naive. They were prepared. 9 young Soviets, all experienced hikers, all trained in survival, endurance, cold. And they had done this before. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Smart, disciplined, trusted. He had chosen each member of the expedition personally, not just for skill, but for cohesion, a team that could depend on one another through cold, wind, fatigue, and fear. And they weren't just hiking for fun. This was a Category 3 ski trek, the most difficult rating. And if completed, it would earn them a prestigious certification. A badge of honor, a proof of strength. The group included Zina Kolmogorova, 22, energetic, funny, tough. She'd done 10 serious hikes before this. Rustam Slobodin, 23, tall, quiet, a distance runner. He once ran a half marathon in sub-zero temperatures. Yuri Doroshenko, 21. Fearless. He once fought a bear with a geologist's hammer, lived to laugh about it. Ludmila Dubinina, 20. Bright, composed, stubborn in the best way. Once completed an expedition even after being accidentally shot in the leg. Yuri Krivonishenko, 24. The Joker, the singer, the morale booster. Nikolai Thibault Brignol, 23. Known as Kolya, calm under pressure, a nuclear physics student. Semyon Zolotaryov, the oldest, 38. A last-minute addition, World War II veteran, tattooed, mysterious. No one truly knew what he had seen. And Alexander Kolovatov, 24. Analytical, private, a man with secrets, and a quiet kind of intensity. One more person was with them at the start, Yuri Yudin, but he turned back on the 28th of January due to sciatica pain. It was the last time he'd see his friends alive. The group set out from Vizhay, a remote village, on the 27th of January, 1959. Their plan: ski north toward Mount Otorten, a place the Mansi people considered sacred and dangerous. Each day, they made camp, logged weather, took photos. They joked. They sang. They kept meticulous diaries. On the 31st of January, they reached the edge of a highland pass. The weather was turning. Strong wind, low visibility, snow thickening. They built a storage cache in the forest to lighten their packs. Extra food, supplies, things they planned to retrieve on the way back. The next day, the 1st of February, they began ascending toward Kholat Syakhl, Dead Mountain. But visibility worsened. They veered off course. Instead of circling the ridge to find shelter, they stopped on an open slope. No trees, no cover, just snow and wind. They set up their tent there, possibly not to lose altitude, or because they knew turning back would cost them time. We know this because of the photos they took. The camera, found later buried in the snow, had one final roll. Photos of smiles, of skis, of the group building the tent, of frozen eyelashes and playful grins. But the last few frames, blurred, dark, unfocused. Shapes that looked like lights, movement, snow, or something else. It ends there. No more photos. No more diary entries. No more voices. What happened on the night of the 1st of February? What made them cut the tent from the inside? What made them flee into darkness? Barefoot, without jackets, without weapons? And why did they run in different directions? We still don't know, but what was left behind tells us something. The route was planned. The group was strong. The last photos show no panic, no sickness, no enemy. So what changed? What came through the snow that night? And why did it leave no trace? The group was never heard from again. For days, no one noticed. The 12th of February. That was the date the Dyatlov group had promised to send a telegram. Back in Vizhay, back in civilization. But when the date passed, people weren't alarmed. Delays were common. Weather could be brutal. Radio silence was expected. But by the 16th of February, family members started asking questions. By the 20th of February, students from the Polytechnic Institute demanded a search. What began as a rescue quickly turned into something else. First, volunteers, then military, then Mansi hunters, the indigenous people of the region. Helicopters, snowmobiles, ski patrols. They searched from the forests, to the mountain, to the rivers. Nothing until the 26th of February. A searcher spots something strange sticking out of the snow. Something beige, something man-made. They dig, and there, half buried, is the group's tent. But not as they expected it. The tent had collapsed, and its side had been cut open, not torn, not ripped by wind, but slashed from the inside out. Clothing and gear still lay neatly inside. Shoes lined up, cameras packed, backpacks untouched. No blood, no struggle, no evidence of an attack. But the hikers were gone. Outside the tent, searchers found a trail, footprints. They led down the slope toward a forested area. The strange part? Most were barefoot, some in just socks. One showed only a single boot. The prints were shallow, undisturbed by wind or new snow. They suggested a calm walk, not a panicked sprint. But if that's true, why flee into the darkness? With no shoes and temperatures at -20? The tracks continued for nearly 500 meters before fading completely. Then came the next discovery. At the edge of the forest beneath a large cedar tree, they found the first two bodies, Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko. Both were barefoot, in underwear, hands and feet severely frostbitten, flesh burned, as if they'd held something too hot. A fire pit was nearby, just enough warmth to last an hour. And on the branches above them, pieces of torn skin, broken limbs. Had they climbed in desperation? To escape something? To see something? 3 more bodies were found next. Between the tree and the tent, Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova, Rustam Slobodin. Their poses haunting, as if trying to crawl back, fingers frozen mid-motion, faces twisted, snow clinging to skin like ash. Still, no signs of a fight, no external wounds except for a cracked skull on Slobodin. But even that wouldn't have killed him. The final 4 were missing for 2 more months, until May, when the snow melted and revealed a ravine 75 meters deeper into the woods. There, buried beneath 4 meters of snow, they found them. Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault Brignot, Alexander Kolovatov. These were not simple deaths. Lyudmila's ribs were shattered. Her tongue was missing, her eyes gone, stomach contents untouched, her hands clutching cloth from someone else's coat. Zolotaryov's chest was crushed, his eyes missing as well, but no external bruises, no bleeding. Kolya Nikolai had a massive skull fracture. Doctors would later say, it's like being hit by a car or a high-speed collision. But none of them had broken skin, only internal destruction. No avalanche could do this. No animal could choose such injuries. No enemy left behind these patterns. And then came the Geiger counter readings. Radiation. On their clothes, The levels weren't catastrophic, but enough to raise questions, especially considering two members had once worked at a nuclear facility. Coincidence? Or connection? Back at the tent, investigators took more samples. The snow around the tent was strangely clean. No signs of melting. No urine. No blood. No debris. Like they had simply vanished into the snow. And then one more clue. A single camera, belonging to Zolotaryov, not listed in the official group equipment. Its final photo, blurred, overexposed, motion. Some see a light, others a figure. But it's inconclusive, just like everything else. The official conclusion? A compelling natural force. No names, no suspects, no further questions. But to those who found the tent, the footprints, the frozen bodies, it never felt natural. Something else happened on that mountain. And in part 4, we start asking the questions they tried to bury. They didn't all die at once. They didn't die in the same way, or even in the same place. And that is what makes this case so hard to forget. The Dyatlov group was found in 3 distinct locations. Some died almost immediately. Some tried to survive for hours. The first 2 bodies, Doroshenko and Krivonishenko, were found by the cedar tree, barefoot, half naked, frostbitten, burned. Their hands were shredded as if they'd clawed at the bark. Nearby, remnants of a fire, enough to keep warm for a short time. The next 3, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, lay between the tree and the tent, as if they had tried to return. Dyatlov's body showed no wounds, but his fists were clenched, his face frozen in tension, bruising on one ankle like someone had grabbed him. Zina, face down in the snow, had cuts on her hands and a long bruise along her side. Slobodin had a cracked skull, yet experts say he likely stayed conscious for hours. And then the ravine. The last 4 bodies were found months later, beneath 4 meters of snow, and their condition was different. Alexander Kolovatov, severe neck trauma. No external bruises. His watch had stopped at 8:38. Semyon Zolotaryov, crushed ribs. No external injury. Camera slung around his neck damaged. A strange military tattoo on his shoulder no one knew he had. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, massive skull trauma, like a car crash. No external wounds, no defensive injuries. And Ludmila Dubenina, her ribs shattered, her tongue missing, her eyes gone, her stomach undisturbed, hands clutched to her chest, expression unreadable. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading to the bodies, only away from the tent. And the snow around them was clean, sterile. So what happened? Let's examine the theories. 1. Avalanche. The official Soviet explanation in 1959, a spontaneous avalanche drove them to panic, fleeing into the cold. Sounds reasonable at first. But the slope wasn't steep enough. The tent was still partially standing. Equipment was undisturbed. Footprints were preserved. Most injuries were not consistent with blunt trauma from snow, and none of the rescuers reported avalanche debris. Even today, modern simulations fail to replicate such an event without leaving far more destruction. 2. Katabatic winds. A sudden wind pattern, rare but deadly. Cold air racing downhill fast, invisible, forceful, could have caused the tent to collapse, driven the hikers to escape barefoot. But that theory depends on one thing: no time to think. Yet the group left in single file. Not a chaotic stampede. They had time to light a fire, break branches, hide in the ravine. Does that sound like panic? Or like a plan? 3. Infrasound, the Kármán vortex street theory. This is where it gets strange. Wind passing over the mountain can, under the right conditions, create low-frequency vibrations below the range of human hearing. But your body feels it. Your mind reacts. Infrasound can induce dizziness, panic, shortness of breath, fear, hallucinations. Could this have caused disorientation? A shared sense of terror? A reason to flee, even if there was nothing there? But again, it doesn't explain the massive trauma. And why didn't they return once they were away? Why not go back to the tent? 4. Military testing. This is where things get darker. In 1959, the area was known for secret Soviet experiments. Some believe the hikers stumbled upon something they weren't meant to see. Perhaps parachute mines, or chemical weapons, or high-frequency blasts. The trauma matches. Explosive shockwaves could cause internal injuries without external damage. And the radiation on some clothes? Maybe from contaminated gear or fallout. But there's no proof. No blast crater. No debris. And no official records. Because if it was military, there wouldn't be. 5. UFOs and light orbs. This one seems far-fetched, until you look at the evidence. Multiple locals reported strange orange lights in the sky that night, and the last photo blurred, glowing shapes might show orbs of light above the trees. Some believe the hikers saw something unnatural, something that terrified them, or perhaps that followed them. The missing tongue, the burned skin, the symmetrical injuries, all match other alleged abduction cases. But again, belief is not evidence. 6. The Mansi people. Some early reports blamed the local indigenous group, the Mansi, claimed it was sacred land, that the hikers trespassed, that they were attacked. But the Mansi were helping with the search. There were no signs of a fight, no other footprints, no motive. And besides, the Mansi feared the mountain themselves. They called it, "Don't go there." 7. KGB espionage. Zolotaryov, the oldest member, was mysterious. Veteran, tattooed, had worked in classified facilities. Some theorize he was on a secret mission, that some in the group were carrying radioactive samples, that the group was killed by their own government. But why leave the bodies? Why not erase all traces? Unless it was meant to be a warning. So what's the truth? Avalanche? Wind? Panic? Weapons? Aliens? None of the theories explain everything. And that's why this case lives on. 9 hikers went up the mountain. Only one survived because he turned back. And what the rest saw, what they faced that night, was never recorded. But what if it wasn't one thing? What if it was all of them, layered, entangled, like the snow itself? In the next part, we examine the aftermath, the investigations, the autopsies, and the contradictions, because the more the government tried to explain, the more it looked like a cover-up. They called it closed. In 1959, just 4 months after the last body was found, the Soviet case was archived. Final cause of death: an unknown compelling force. No further explanation, no follow-up, no accountability. But the files didn't stay buried forever. Decades later, in the 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, researchers gained access to some of the case files. What they found only raised more questions. Pages were missing, photos misnumbered, autopsies inconsistent. One body labeled without injuries, later confirmed with a fractured skull. Another autopsy referenced clothing that didn't match what the body was found wearing. There were reports of metal fragments found near the site, never logged, and there were journal pages gone. It didn't look like a closed case. It looked like a cover-up. So what do we know now? Has modern science finally solved the Dyatlov mystery? Let's start with the Avalanche again. In 2021, researchers from ETH Zurich and Cornell University used real physics to simulate what could have happened on Dead Mountain. They used terrain data, snow density, wind conditions, ski slope dynamics. And yes, they concluded a small slab avalanche was possible. Not a massive wall of snow, but a compact, hard slab of ice suddenly detaching, crashing down on the tent at night. It wouldn't bury them, but it could injure people inside, crack ribs, cause panic, and make returning dangerous. That's how they explained the trauma. But that still doesn't explain why the group fled in socks, single file, why they didn't return once it cleared, why they separated, why there was radiation, why the tongue and eyes were missing, and most of all, why the files were so carefully censored. In 2019, the Russian government reopened the investigation, officially for transparency, unofficially to silence conspiracy theories. Their conclusion? Avalanche. Again, but this time with diagrams, simulations, legal stamps. They ruled out UFOs. They ruled out Mansi people. They ruled out weapons. They stuck to physics, to snow science, and they released a 40-page report. But skeptics weren't convinced because the injuries didn't match, and the timelines contradicted the survivors' own interviews, and because none of it explained the missing hours. Satellite imagery shows strange heat patterns in the area. That night, a former KGB officer testified off-record that the site was flagged as military sensitive, and hikers in nearby ranges on the same night reported strange lights in the sky. We also now know the Ural region had multiple test launches in the 1950s, some of them unrecorded. The Soviet Ministry of Defense later admitted that they destroyed launch records for safety reasons. So what's left? What can we say for sure? We know the group set up their tent at 5 p.m. We know they ate dinner. We know they kept journals. And we know at some point after 9 p.m., something happened. We know they cut out the side of their own tent. From the inside, We know they walked calmly down the slope, barefoot, in formation. We know they tried to light a fire. We know 2 froze to death, 3 more collapsed mid-return, and 4 were crushed. We know some of their clothing was radioactive. We know some of their injuries could not have come from a fall. And we know no one heard them scream. Some believe it was psychological mass panic. Some believe it was physical, wind, snow, injury. Others say it was political, a secret the government couldn't afford to expose. And still others believe it was something not of this world. But ask yourself this: why didn't they just go back? They had boots. They had coats. They had fire-starting gear. The tent wasn't buried. They knew the terrain. They had options. But instead, they scattered, as if they were trying to get away from something or someone. In part 6, we return to the mountain, and we ask the only question that really matters: what were they running from? March, present day, Kholat Syakhl, Dead Mountain. The wind is quieter now, but it still speaks. The snow has covered the footprints. The tent is gone. So are the bodies. But the mountain remains. Hikers come here every year, some to honor the 9, some to feel the chill of mystery. Some come alone. Some never speak again. There is no monument not on the ridge. No plaque. No signs. Just cold and silence. And if you stand still long enough, something else. Something watching. At the base of the slope, a stone memorial bears their names: Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, Slobodin, Dubinina, Krivonichenko, Thibaut Brignol, Zolotaryov, Doroshenko, Kolivatov. 9 names, 9 stories, 9 minds that never told us what happened. So now we guess. Let's return to that night, the 1st of February, 1959. Around 9:30 p.m. The group has eaten. They're relaxed, writing in journals. Zina makes a joke. Krivonichenko hums a song. Then, a sound. Something strikes the snow. Not a crash, but deep, vibrational. Then, stillness. And then another. Closer. A glow appears behind the tent wall. Orange. Pulsing. Not fire. Not flashlight. Something unnatural. Panic builds. Dyatlov reaches for the zipper, but stops. Whoever, whatever, is outside. So they cut the side of the tent. Fast. Deliberate. One after another. They step into the cold. Not running. Not screaming. But knowing they can't go back. Something has chosen them. This is not a theory. This is a reconstruction, a thought experiment, one built on logic and fear. What if the group saw a military test, a prototype weapon launched by accident, a mine dropped from the sky, a chemical agent, a sound wave, something that disoriented their minds, triggered hallucinations, induced terror? That would explain the precise injuries, the radiation, the symmetry of death, the separation. It would explain why they didn't return, why they didn't trust their own shelter, why they lit a fire and then disappeared into the trees. And most of all, why the case was silenced. But there's another possibility. Worse. What if it wasn't man-made? What if it was the mountain? What if there is something ancient, silent, that lives up there? Invisible, unknowable, buried beneath the snow and rock and time. What if it calls out not in words, but in frequencies? In instincts? What if those who camp on that slope don't leave the same? Something the Mansi knew, something the Soviets feared, something we keep trying to name, but can't. Dead Mountain doesn't take everyone, only those who stay too long, those who look too closely, and those who ask questions that shouldn't be answered. Some say the hikers died of hypothermia. Some say they were killed by sound, or snow, or silence. But the truth might be simpler and darker. They saw something they shouldn't have. And whatever it was, it saw them too. So now, over 60 years later, we are left with pieces, photos, journals, footprints, fractured ribs, missing eyes, and a question. Would you have left the tent? Would you have walked into the freezing dark to escape something worse? Would you have burned your hands trying to climb a tree? Would you have hidden in a ravine, covering your friend with a jacket, as your chest collapsed from pressure? Would you have stayed calm? Or would you have known it was already too late? We'll never know what the Dyatlov group saw. We only know they never made it back. And maybe that's what Dead Mountain does best. Not kill, but erase. Not loudly, but slowly, until all that's left is wind, and questions, and snow,